I'm going to talk about cityscapes and transformations and the interventions they cause in the urban environment. And the slide I'm going to show here and start out with was actually done last year from the lake. And this slide was taken in last year and is obviously the Cityscape of Chicago. And we're starting out with what you just saw, the Hancock, the Sears Tower, now the Willis Tower. And all the buildings which are this bluish tone were not there at that time. And I think this is a perfect example how tall towers have become the most visible symbols of the transformation of a city and cityscapes. And in our work, we have always been very careful and considerate that the tall building is tied intrinsically to the time and place and context and to historic prototypes of a particular place, based our transformations and interventions into the cityscapes on those aspects. And the design strategies we pursued and developed from these urban characteristics become actually more evident and less exchangeable with other places and on cities with a great urban and a long urban history. And furthermore, obviously these interventions have been driven by an attitude which, by an agenda which was based on a belief that change, innovation, and how we deal with the natural resources have to make progress and look into the future. For instance, on the right side, you see the Hancock building, and just before those small buildings actually are the 868 Shore Drive apartment buildings of Mies van der Rohe. And you see a tremendous jump in scale. Our work started, and the work I was responsible for started in the early 70s with a series of buildings in Chicago. And in these buildings at that time, and every other architects and my predecessors at the firm, other architects like Bruce Graham and Jack Brownson, we all saw our task in what to do after Mies. So the transformations was a process of new forms, new materials, using color, and obviously what drives architecture always the best way is new techniques and technology, and trying to change the conventional expectations. The Xerox Center had a curve, had a top, and it was white, and it was considered a crime by the Miesians. And once a Werke building was an effort to interpret some of the surrounding and across the street located buildings, which were Art Deco buildings, in a way to abstract that particular style in a more contemporary way. And the Northwestern Atrium Center was a building which housed obviously a train station and the streamlined forms, and they were obviously a way to connote speed and progress of that time of the art moderne. For a while, we did more work outside Chicago, and just about 4 or 5 years ago, we did this apartment building, which was a deliberate effort to take the Miesian vocabulary and bring it on a more contemporary way, with more transparency, with better inside-outside relationships through loggias and balconies, through higher floor-to-ceiling heights, and accepting actually the individual appearance what these apartment buildings have through their different living preferences in the apartments, and express the bottom, which has a 8-story parking garage, or to express the top, which has some residential amenities, and the rooftop in a way that there is a distinct difference to those office buildings, which are more solid and obviously more regular to the essentially single use of the offices. And that work got us then in the mid-'80s and all the way through the mid-'90s, quite a few projects in New York. And in New York, the situation was quite different because compared to Chicago, New York is a very dense city. There is a greater history of the skyscraper, and the idea to transform the typical American skyscraper, and especially those marvelous tops all these older buildings have, to actually translate it together with the requirements of the New York zoning code and the available technology into a contemporary state which kind of fits in. And when you see these buildings, which were just recently photographed, you show actually that the buildings, that they, much different to the Chicago buildings, have to be seen in the context of the city rather than as individual monument. And the building on Lexington Avenue, the second in front of the Chrysler building, actually just as a column with a capital, is just a contrast and not tries to compete with it. These are the archetypal mega forms of tall buildings, like the obelisk, the column, the round drum, and then with the stepped ziggurat also on Lexington Avenue up in the 60s, in the City Spire building, which is a stepped octagon with a domed structure reflecting to a landmark which is on its base. And then we make a big time leap, and we're getting to the World Trade Center, the new World Trade Center, and there we don't have the old New York. This is a new and different New York, and the building on the right is an apartment building which is getting constructed now, was stopped for several years, with a very small footprint, 800 feet tall, which speaks a much different language than all those other buildings which were in Midtown, and And one can say that overall to this complex that it is probably less New York than the other buildings were, and that these buildings probably could just as well also be, somewhere else. But this is what happens in that global world. From New York, we moved to Philadelphia, and these were the first buildings which were taller than William Penn's head on City Hall, and they were influenced also by those historic buildings to have a more figurative and expressive and formal language, but constructed in a very modern technological way. Los Angeles on Wilshire Boulevard, compared to those monstrous modern buildings, are much more detailed and subtle structure, which kind of responds to that classical LA modern of the 30s. And in Jacksonville, Florida, in a downtown with emerging office towers, the obelisk seemed to be the way to kind of unite and give that downtown image and a sign. And then moving on to Las Vegas, these buildings were just finished a couple of years ago. Not in the city center complex, not something which is themed, something which one also could do only in Las Vegas. The building could dance, they could wear, they could have colors, they have those shades. And like my client Thomas told me when I tried to sell it to him, I know, Helmut, he said, they are cool. And there were all reasons for this, the shading, the high sun in summer, using elements of the wearing, improving the views on the towers which are fairly close together. These were all ways of incorporating technical and sustainable requirements, natural resources into the design and process and ultimately the building. Various architects, the buildings are actually built kind of next or on top of a retail mall, which was done by Daniel Libeskind. And so then I always call this, we did a little side trip. This was in the early 80s to South Africa. And I had a client there. This was actually, he headed up the development of the division of De Beers. And he wanted us to do buildings there because he believed in the benefits of technology on life and on society. And he saw those buildings as a way to have a futuristic architecture pointing to a better social and political future for that country. And so the diamond in Johannesburg and a spiral, which is also a very recurring theme and megaform in our structures, became these expressions of this sign of hope. And it was on one of those trips I took to South Africa when I, on a short notice, actually, not flew back to New York, but I flew back to Frankfurt. And And after a long competition process, we did the Mesa Tower, which was a purposeful way to export the American skyscraper to Europe, because the skyscraper was not a building type which existed. All these buildings you see in the background did not exist at that point. And the building was for a long time, and depending whether you count spires or not, is still one of the tallest buildings in Europe, is 255 meters. And it wasn't only a freestanding tower, but it was also the entrance to the Frankfurt Fair. We did also this exhibit hall you see to the right of it, and we created this large public space, which unfortunately for security reasons is always walled off by a fence from the rest of the city. And the colors matched the limestone of the red limestone of that particular reason, and some of the existing buildings there. And the tower on this public place was just sitting on 4 large columns, which a large lobby, and it was an intersection of the form itself of a round drum, which was out of glass, with a curtain wall, which actually was panelized out of stone. And it was always important for me that there was a technological way found to actually make this not just a pastiche of the past, but to construct it in a way which used the utmost modern technologies and techniques. A real breakthrough and a real change in our career really happened, and in the mid-90s, when in part of the reconstruction of Berlin, we won the competition for the Sony Center. And there was a master plan, and there were 2 towers, but this project is not, and you see there were very few tall buildings in Berlin, and there's still few tall buildings in Berlin. These 2 buildings formed a gate, and the complex, consisted of about 7 buildings, and the primary idea was to create a new type of urban space with this covered, not totally air and watertight forum, to not make it an indoor environment, and office, apartment buildings, a museum, the film house, and headquarters of Sony surrounded this space. So it was a way to where the building to the outside faced the real city, but inside this space it became a virtual city. And it was to create a new contemporary way for the way people entertain themselves in our culture, and how this relates to traditional art and entertainment. And I think this has become a place which has become really part of the city. And I think this is seeing these 2 slides, and with the tall tower. Well, the tall tower is 110 meters tall, but I think sometimes in the context of this institution, maybe the height is a little bit more emphasized than the impact these buildings can and should have on the urban environment. And because this is ultimately what makes not only the buildings worthwhile, but makes the cities a better place. Now this was actually the first project which where Werner Soberg and we worked together, and now over close to 20 years, we've done wherever possible all our buildings together, and I know I learned a lot from him, and this was like a new phase in my career, and I think that Werner also looks at architecture kind of a different way, and we called this collaboration archineering. That means that architecture and engineering are integrated, and this doesn't just start when you work out a building, but when you design a building. And one of the most significant results of this collaboration was the Deutsche Post Tower in Bonn, and which is another way where the building has a great deal of transformation and intervention in the city. It was very controversial. Bonn at that time ceased to be the capital of Germany. It became a more commercial place. The Post used to be a government agency. It wanted to set itself apart as a sleepy government agency and wanted to do a state-of-the-art tower. And it was a time of really expressing its corporate vision and culture in a building, something we start to look back for and yearn for it anymore, because that's not, unfortunately, the case anymore. The bottom line counts more than how you house yourself, how you express yourself, and how you also, very important, how you treat the building. And in this building in the Rhine Valley, all the three other high-rises you see were government buildings, and you're looking from the Rhine to the low hills, and it had this aerodynamic shape. It's an ellipse, it's split, and it had elevators going up 40 floors, and it was natural ventilated. It used about 50% of the energy like a conventional building at that time, and it was a lot more pleasant to be in than in this hermetically sealed towers. And it developed a lot of new ways of how facades, how mechanical systems are integrated. There's a panelized roof over the low buildings, but then there's a public way leading to the Rhine. The facade on the north, it's a twin shell facade, and on the north side it's flush. On the south side is shingled, and it's controlled by flaps which let the air in when needed and keep the air out when not needed. With other words, when it's too cold and too hot, you see the structural and the facade parts are literally no visible, and you see the design orientation of the building. On the left side, you look at the Rhine. On the right side, you look in the city, and this is places to interact and for people to be, and the elevators are all glass, and you go up 40 floors, and you are always aware where you are. And shortly afterwards, we did again in a quite different way an intervention in the city of Munich. This is the famous Ludwigstraße, Leo von Klenze, and it's the Ludwigskirche, and this was a master plan, so we didn't come up with the height of the building, but quite frankly, the reaction when the building is 135 meters tall, the tall one, and when they finally found out you could see it from there, from now on, they reduced all the heights in the buildings in Munich to 80 meters. And this building is somewhat the commercial version. Oh, I saw that this thing is only 16 minutes. I'm talking too much. Okay, I'm going quicker. Simple facade, operable windows. At night, the building is marked by fixed lights and moving lights. And when the lights are not on, the natural light and the sun do its place. And then we got another job, which was just on the other end of this Parkstadt Schwabing, which is a peripheral new office and residential park. And now you look in the other way. You see the center of Munich with the church, and the two buildings are in a dialogue. And that roof is visible from the highway which leads in the town. It makes a welcoming gesture. And in this little town near Lake Constance, which was transforming from a manufacturing industry to a service industry, we did this 80-meter tower. And since the building wasn't air-conditioned, it was an option. We had to come up with a way how to shade this building. So there are these movable shades, a dynamic facade. You see the windows are flaps in the spandrels. And in Düsseldorf, we did a shingled facade, and between the shingles, the air comes in, and the shingles are fritted, and they shade the building. And this is a new complex, which obviously, like all new complexes, there's a lot of form making. And in Tokyo, the Japan Post, which was built next to a historic train station, and built over the historic Japan Post, interesting facade, which was shading on the east, west, and south, and clear on the north in Guangzhou, China. Typical new business district with a lot of form-making lights, something very simple, elegant. I mean, you see on that aerial shot, how the city transforms, and it's only a question of time when buildings are built. And at night, you see a lot of garish lights, and these lights are all static, and they don't change. And this tower is built in, getting constructed now in Doha, which merges some Islamic, Arabic motifs into the obelisk. It's a very innovative structure. The whole building is only on 8 columns, 550 meters tall. And this was a project in Dubai, which I always call the Sony Sand in the desert, because these are 8 buildings, connected with a roof, which was the center of a large urban district outside Dubai, between Dubai and Abu Dhabi, Jebel Ali, which was never built. and the roof produced energy, created 30% of the electricity needed through evacuated tube collectors, and above the shopping center, a roof was actually movable, because for a great time of the year, it's actually usable. And the most ostentatious job was in Rosh Hashanah, where there were about 20 buildings, and you see the skyline again of Chicago below. It was of such a scale, that it couldn't be done. There were this twisting tower, the double towers, the endless towers, and obviously the spiral. The spiral actually was quite worked out. There was a chimney which brought air up and drove turbines which produced electricity. Was also the structure column. The uses were suspended between that and the exterior frame, and there was a simple grid shell glazed, and then the scale of these buildings gets bigger and bigger in China. This is a shopping center in the tower in Nanjing. The shopping center being really like an arena. This is downtown Nanjing, where the shopping center is more to the city grid, but the towers have this endless twisting. A tower kind of broken down into 4 tubes. In Seoul, a project where 20 architects do different buildings, where 2 apartment buildings, 320 meters tall, and in the last project, it comes down to just doing the simplest thing. It's in north of Doha in Lusail, a new city, which we did this competition for a monument, and we wanted just not to do an empty monument, but it's a 500-foot tall, meter-tall concrete structure with holes and a slot being out on the end of the pier, and so this should have some content, and the content is that it can do what everybody wants to do it. You can be by yourself, you can be with other people, you can celebrate, you can mourn. It's for all religions, and so it has nothing in it. And it uses the sound of the water and the sound of the wind is something which you experience. Thank you.